now or never. I draw, settle my pin, and I just hear and I'm like, there's no way. There's no way I just did this. Absolutely not. You know, to be there like with my best friend and my dad, it was the best experience of my life.
Other than getting married.
Other than getting married. That's, yeah.
You were just about to say that, and I just sped it up.
Thank you.
I was like, well, if I throw a mic on, then I can help others the way that these people have all helped me.
Born in the heart of the Pennsylvania deer camp, with the help of experts, friends, and local legends, we bring you valuable knowledge and powerful stories for your hunting adventures. Welcome to the East Meets West Hunt Podcast with your host, Beau Martonik.
All right. We are live. Welcome back to another episode of the East Meets West Hunt Podcast, and I'm joined back with my buddy Kane.
How's it going, Beau?
It's good to get to have you.
Glad to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
It is negative 15 currently outside.
It is a beautiful morning in the Pennsylvania woods.
Yeah,
beautiful day to do this.
Man, it's chilly. But you were you working today, or you just
it was good to be an office forester, trying to strategize my work. I told the guys this morning I got to play forester last week and got to work out in the woods marking timber like every day.
Yeah.
So this week it's biting me where I got to be in the office, but that's all right. It's a good week to do it.
Yeah. No, that's it's definitely a good week for that. But I think I might try to do some ice fishing this weekend.
Yeah. See, I'm not too keen on it.
You don't like it?
No. I don't know why. I don't know if I had like a couple horror stories when I was a little kid with my uncle and cousins going. I'm like, this isn't for me. I like being on the bank, wearing my waders, throwing flies. I'm good with that.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you were saying like you didn't like it just from the standpoint you didn't enjoy ice fishing, or you don't enjoy being on the ice.
Right, being on the ice.
Yeah.
That would I look at ice fish and it's like hammering beers, hanging out through your buddies. I'm like, I could get into this, but it's the being on the ice.
Yeah.
And it could be of like the first 10 years of my career of days like today, you're out marking timber, cruising timber, out in the woods all day. So why do I want to go freeze to death on the ice?
Yeah.
No,
that makes total sense. And I was just thinking about it. We have the scouting camp coming up here soon.
Yes, we do.
For anybody listening, Kane, Generations Forestry, I did look back and see that. I don't know if this is accurate, but we haven't done an actual podcast together in 2.5 years.
Yeah, it's been a while, man. Like a long while.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. I figured I was just being shunned or no one wanted to hear me. Probably the majority of it.
There's been a lot of people writing in still about the last one saying they didn't want to want you to come back on.
Trees are boring,
Yeah. No, I guess I didn't think of it because we hang out, and then also with the scouting camp, that's where I was getting at with that, of you being there and being an instructor every year. So
yeah, I will say I am as much of a student as I am an instructor.
Well, I don't know. We'll talk about at some point here today in this episode, this buck that's this giant deer that's sitting here in front of me. I think you might be an instructor.
I may have. I'm hoping that Mason and Moose and Johnny will be like, hey, you're in. You're in with the killers. You know, Greg, I'll give Greg the shout out. He taught me how to scout better on bed. So maybe I'm making the cut.
Yeah. Well, no, Not that we didn't have you there because you're a good hunter, because you are, but you have the expert knowledge in the trees and understanding obviously managing timber harvesting and everything else to the point where it's like that's a whole different dynamic and super important for hunters to have that knowledge and understanding of what that looks like.
Oh, especially up here with the amount of like the way the lands are, whether you're hunting public land, private land, industry-owned land, people that own their own forest land, woodlots and whatnot. You really need to know how the dynamics of timber harvesting, forest management, and truly the difference, because there's a lot of timber harvesting that I'll go and look at and be like, this is not forest management. This is just value extraction. So, a lot of landowners, hunters, etc., they may see like, oh, this is great what they're doing. But, you got to look at it as the today, the 5 years down the road, the 10 years down the road, and the 100 years down the road. So there's a whole lot that goes into it. So being able to educate as many people as I can is pretty awesome.
Yeah, man, it's super cool. I learned a ton. And for anyone that hadn't listened to the other ones, first of all, I recommend you go back and listen to them. But so Kenny and myself, we've been buddies for a long
time.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, oh, it's just a few years ago. We were in college, but boy, it was 15.
I know. Or it's my 15-year class reunion from high school this year.
Yeah, so when I met you, you were still in high school.
Yeah. We've known each other for a long time, but it wasn't until years even in doing the podcast that I really, put two and two together about like with you with doing everything with forestry and how some of that benefits deer hunters. I mean, I knew what logging cuts, but I don't know. I knew you as a friend.
Right.
Didn't really know as much about what you did.
We weren't quite being professionals yet.
Yes.
Now we're in the stage where it's like, hey, we're professionals. You realize what the people around you do professionally.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, they're not just fun to hang out with. You can learn something from them.
You can learn. That would be a great way of being able to explain it. So, you'd reached out about, some of the, the private lands that were open to public hunting. And
that article that you wrote for
Meat Eater.
Yep. Yeah, I read that article. I'm like, dude, I got to reach out. Like, that was awesome because, and again, like the public land is so important to all the hunters. But in our neck of the woods, in Pennsylvania in particular, I used to remember all these numbers, so give me a little bit of slack. There's about 17 million acres of forest land in PA, and it's less than 3 million's public. So the rest of that is private-owned lands, whether it's small wood lots that are, down in the Ridge and Valley region that's more agriculture, or it's up in the Northwest where it's, timber companies that own it, investment companies that own it. So it's really important for the way we hunt up here of knowing what goes on the landscape.
Yeah, and the more I've learned is a lot of other states operate similarly with having some of those timberlands that are available. I mean, through the Northeast, even moving down south of here, like there's quite a bit of that now. A lot of it is becoming leased, that's even happening in Pennsylvania.
Man, I mean, if we wanted to go down that rabbit hole, it could be a whole episode in itself about truly changing the dynamics of hunting in Northwest PA. Mm-hmm. I mean, just in the last few years.
Yeah, Northwest, North Central. And honestly, it's everywhere. It's not just PA.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
It's definitely everywhere where, traditionally when I first started hunting, a lot of the lands we worked on were privately owned, but it was, large family ownerships, and maybe they kept it for themselves to only hunt. But there was other ones like, hey, their whole goal is forest management, getting good regeneration. And when the deer herd was crazy high, you couldn't get good regeneration. So it was promoting hunting, public to hunt on that private, that privately owned land so that we could manage the forest for the future. But now that was at the time when the value of the timber was, 2, 3, 4 times what it is today. So these landowners got to figure out a way to pay their taxes, generate revenue, and hunting leases is a huge part of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess I didn't realize what. Obviously, with these landowners, they can make money from hunting leases, and so I wasn't sure and I'm sure some of it has part to the popularity and wanting to have hunting leases and having that ability to have your own places to go to. But most of these aren't. I mean, there are some that are 1 or 2 people leasing, but most of them are like larger groups, clubs, hundreds of people that are leasing out these giant places so they can recreate and camp and do that. And I think there's no problem with. I think there's benefits to it. I shouldn't say there's no problem. There's problems, but there's a benefit to being able to have those places and have the places to be able to ride side by sides and 4-wheelers that you don't really have that ability to in a lot of places legally. So
right, and that's the way I grew up. Like when I was a kid, I wasn't allowed to have a 4-wheeler because my dad spent so much time getting rid of them, ripping and tearing on our logging roads and creating, just trespassing on folks' lands. And it's like, well, hey, if you're not allowed to be there, don't be there.
Yeah.
A little bit of respect. And then the one time I finally got my 4-wheeler, and me and a group of my buddies leave our friend's house, and we had a football fundraiser and had to drive from our friend's house to our local sportsman's club to help out with a sporting clay shoot. And I'm just following my friends. Well, didn't this pipeline we were taking go past our office? And my dad looks out the window and's like, yep, there he goes. I think I had my 4-wheeler for like a week.
That's why you weren't allowed to have.
Yeah, I'm like, it's trespassing, not just on, client's land, but his own land, the company's own land. Like, hey, no 4-wheelers are here. There we go. That didn't last long. So, whatever. I got some good life lessons out of it.
Yeah.
But that's one of the big things. I see a lot of the hunting and we manage them, for our clients. We manage hunting leases, and I call them hunting leases, but we talk to our clients and it's recreational leases. There's as many or more folks that get on these leases to ride their side-by-sides and 4-wheelers and put their campers there. And then come hunting season, you'd expect that it's crazy busy. And it's like, well, no, there's just like 10 guys here.
Yeah.
So you see a real change of the way the land's being used, which then also helps create problems for us in our forest management is, hey, we need a certain amount of deer killed so we can get our regeneration in these timber harvests. And if there's not enough people harvesting does and taking a toll on the deer herd, it's a negative impact on us. And boy, it brings a challenge.
Yeah. It's I've, as being part of a hunting lease where I've got to see like the club style where there's a bunch of people on it and everything. Like for the most part, I've had the negative side or seen the negative side of there being more people than there was on public land because of the ease of access by roads, ATVs, doing that. Now, is a lot of people hunting hard? Or are a lot of people hunting hard? Probably not. Now, there are people that are, but there's a lot that aren't too, and it just makes it difficult and frustrating from that standpoint. But what I've seen is like a lot of these, and ones that I've talked to, buddies of mine that are on different leases and stuff, a lot of them will have it where they make their own rules as far as like, okay, club members can't shoot does. Cause like, again, that's been something that growing up in an area, and especially in our lifetime where deer numbers were low for a long time, and where, the previous generations had a lot more deer. So the mindset is don't shoot does. And that's been the mindset. And now some of these populations have gotten out of hand in these clubs and these leases to the point where things are becoming overbrowsed and you can't regenerate the forest the way that it needs to be. And even though it doesn't seem like there's a lot of deer compared to the Midwest, you also got to understand that we don't have the food to be able to maintain a healthy deer herd and sustain a population like you would have in agricultural areas.
Exactly. I mean, and it's like looking at it, the tons per acre, the measurement that's used on how much, food is out there, how much browse. I used to know these numbers. I don't remember the numbers, but it's crazy how much browse a deer needs to eat every day. Where you take like in our neck of the woods, like you could go for 20 miles and there's no agriculture. You're relying strictly on browse, or a year like this where you have a good acorn crop, a good cherry crop, like some mass producers. And we don't have the mass producing trees that was here 100 years ago. We have oak, cherry, beech, hickory, but there's not like the chestnuts that were here. The health of the beech trees is not there. So you aren't getting a constant flow of beech nuts like we did for a couple years back. We had a crazy beech crop, and it was like, even all of us, foresters, like, holy crap, where'd this come from? This is awesome. Mm-hmm. And then haven't seen one in, I think, 3-4 years, so it's always crazy and trying to manage that dynamic.
Yeah, man, it is crazy. And like last year at the scouting camp, so where we were having the scouting camp at one of the places, it was a client property of yours that we got permission to be able to utilize to do it. And you were showing me the example of when there's too many deer on a place of big timber where, you know, you're doing these, like basically this whole stretch of property, a lot of the top is cut, different ages of clear cuts, different management styles to it. And that's a lot of the part of the education with the scouting camp is, you know, showing people when you come across these cuts, what you're looking at, what you should expect in the next few years as far as hunting plans, what the deer, how the deer are going to use them, all those things. But nonetheless, you had showed me, we were walking with a group and there was what I would call, you know, a young tree that was growing up, is only 3 foot tall or so. And you looked at me and you're like, how old do you think this tree is? And I was like, I don't know, a couple years old. Yeah. And you're like, no, that's a 7-year-old tree. Yep. And I was like, how can you tell that?
Yeah, the stem of it was the size of my thumb.
Yeah.
And it was browsed off. We counted them back, and it was browsed off 7 different times. So I looked at it like, I was cheating a little bit. I knew that stand was initially harvested 8 years ago. So I knew that seedling probably had that jump, and you could see every spot that it was browsed. And then, you know, across the street was an area that we harvested 10 years ago. So it was kind of like right on that verge of the deer herd was low compared, you know, like when we grew up, like early teenagers, early 2000s, it was a low deer herd.
Oh yeah.
Low deer herd. Where now, like, it's creeping up, where our habitat's in check with it, where it's still holding strong, but we're getting to where it's going to start making that drop, where the habitat's going to start declining because the deer herd's starting to get high again. And I'm sure there's probably half the people listening to this are like, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, we can see it on the forest floor where we were, you know, moving up harvest schedules where, you know, like my father's been in the forest management business for 40 plus years. And it's like, holy cow, we were able to move things along faster because the deer herd was low. So we're able to get stands regenerated quicker where he never saw in his lifetime.
Yeah.
Which it's just really crazy to see, you know, and we're starting to see that where now it's like, hey, we're going to have to implement harvest sooner to release that regeneration. And, you know, and the folks that don't know, like we do these timber harvests because a lot of the, you know, to harvest timber, to, you know, manage a resource, to provide a sustainable product. But, you know, a lot of it is for these trees to grow, they're shade intolerant. So they need a lot of sunlight to be able to grow. So if you have that canopy over top of them, there's too much sunlight, they're just going to, you know, literally die out, or the deer will browse them out. But if you release them, give them that sunlight, they'll be able to flourish and take off. And, you know, and I keep harping, deer browse. People are going to get sick of me talking about it. But you have to get past that browse line where, you know, the next generation of the forest can go. So it's a real, you know, issue that we're dealing with. We're doing harvests a little bit earlier because that regeneration's right there where we need to get the tops on the ground of the overstory, and it makes like a natural layer deer protector so those seedlings can take off. So we're doing things a little bit earlier than we would 5 years ago.
Interesting. And like, yeah, at least this is my uneducated opinion on it. I feel like in a lot of the areas I hunt, that doesn't mean it's different.
Yep.
10 miles this way or 5 miles that way, but in a lot of areas I hunt, I feel like the deer herd is at a good place. I don't want it to be any higher. I don't want it to be any lower.
Right.
From the standpoint, this seems like they still have really healthy bodies, some of the biggest bodies that I've seen.
Yep.
We're getting a good age class. We're getting good structure with it, but you're also not, you know, I can still sit for 3 days and not see a deer, but it's not as common as it was even 10 years ago.
Sit, and hey, you can still do it. Like this season was totally an anomaly for me. Like, you know, of my sits, it's like usually I'm 1 out of 3 sits, I'll see deer.
Yep.
This year it's like, dang, it was every sit I had but one saw deer. I'm like, wow, that's pretty good. But we're right on that cusp where it's like, hey, if we don't start realizing we need to manage our deer herd and actually shoot does on a landscape level, just because someone may be doing it here, but if they're not doing it, you know, the farmer, the family that owns this 100 acres here, hey, they're shooting their, you know, what is sustainable on that 100 acres, those 3-4 deer a year off of it. But if the hunt lease, you know, I'll pick on hunt leases on this 10,000 acre tract next door is only shooting like 4 or 5 doe a year, that whole landscape is going to become unsustainable. So, you know, trying to look at everything like big landscape level of like what you're doing. And I'm sure we all deal with it of like, hey, you know, on my property here, I got a picture of this 150, but he's not living here. Well, you know, also what your neighbor right here is doing a quarter mile down the road impacts how that deer became a 150-inch deer, and he has just as good a shot at taking them out too.
Yep.
But it's all on like that landscape level. What the management's going on has a big impact.
Yeah, and that's where I struggle a lot with looking at, okay, you know, like the state when they're coming to manage like doe populations and everything, like there's a lot of people that get upset when, okay, say they increase doe tags and doe numbers doe tags essentially and certain WMUs, and they're like, okay, well, my area doesn't have that many. It can't sustain the amount they increased it. And it's like, yeah, that's because there might be an area that's still in that WMU that has so many more, and you can't manage it on such a small enough level. So I really think it's important for all of us to kind of look at what you are seeing, especially if you're someone that's in the woods a lot, and determine like, you know, this year, you know, I'd shot a doe, and we had like areas when we went out and we were doe hunting, we purposely looked at areas that I knew that there was higher populations within the larger WMU, and then focused on those areas. We take a couple deer out here, a couple deer out of there, and like trying. And it's not like I'm not sitting here saying I'm a biologist by any means, but I spent a lot of time in the woods, and you can see where those places are impacted. And once you're educated on things like what Kenny was talking about with being able to see when things are overbrowsed and understanding it, then you can start to have an idea what that looks like. Right.
And that is one of the big things is and now they're like with YouTube and everything else, there's so many resources out there to see what, you know, an overbrowsed for, you know, regeneration looks like. And you can find it when you see an area that's harvested and look at it 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, and it's still only like knee high. It's being overbrowsed. Like that area needs to be hunted on doe patrol. You know, like it's going to be a great spot to hunt. You know, so it's a lot of different things to be looked at for it.
Yeah, it's there's not an easy answer to it. And like again, I remember this was not that long. Anytime I bring up deer populations, it creates controversy because again, someone lives in a different area. If I ever say that deer population, I'm like, it's relatively low deer density. Yes, it is relatively low deer density compared to agricultural areas and things there. And I'll hear, Pennsylvania's got way too many deer. And it's like, okay, maybe in the areas that you're familiar with, but not all areas are similar. And then likewise there's not many deer where I'm at. Well, okay, that's where you're at. Yeah. And then also, actually, you know, if things are done right, and this is my opinion here too, but with forests, when a forest that looks good has diversity to it and has areas that are thicker, has areas that are open, has a whole diverse look at it. So sometimes there might be more deer than you're actually seeing there as well.
So, I mean, so many more. And that's one of the things of, and like, I'll say like a question, something like the hunting style. The hunting style that my dad did, your dad, your uncles did, you think it's the same that they still hunt it today? I mean, that's a really, like, really want to ask your dad that is like, hey, in rifle season, was it like now everyone wants to go to their one spot, sit there, get in their stand, sit there all day, where it's like, hey, when I grew up, I'm not saying it was the tracking style, but it was like the still hunting, still hunting, the moving, that like you don't really bump. If you bump into someone hunting now, I've found it's like when I'm moving, I find someone sitting. Like I'm not seeing that merge of like getting deer moving because man, they're smart. They know where to hide. And I mean, so many times it's like, hey, I know they are in there, but it's like, how the heck do I get in there to hunt them without just blowing them out?
Yeah. And all right, so to go back, you had said something that is also something that recently you sent me an article that was super controversial.
Oh, yeah.
About, you know, the forest management you were talking about with leaving the tops down. And I believe, I shouldn't say it if I don't know exactly or if I just heard it from somewhere else. But basically, that this, whoever went in there and cut that was lazy because they left the tops down and they didn't clean it up. But that is not the purpose for leaving the tops down.
Correct. So there's a rhyme and a reason to everything. And like this article, they were going after the game commission and stuff they did on the game lands. And, I can't say exactly what the practice was because I watched it go on. I was managing a piece of timber like not far from there. Like I drove past it, and I'd say they were probably doing, don't quote me on it, like a crop tree release where they were going in and cutting all the birch and the beech and the junk out around from oak, cherry, maple, the species that they're looking to grow. Because one, they're going to be getting good cover on the ground for early successional habitat. They're releasing those mass-producing crop trees. Predominantly the oak was the target, is mass producers for the future. So they're, when the Game Commission does something, they're doing it strictly for the health of wildlife. It may be something I look at, hey, we're gonna be able to deer hunt this, or hey, this is gonna be great for bear, but they're doing it for the wood rat is their focus of it. I was talking with one of their foresters. I'm like, hey, why are you spraying for gypsy moth on this ridge? Like the timber is literally worth less more than what you're paying. He said, no, we got to keep that in check. And the wood rat was their focus of doing, investing the money into this area, because everything they do is for wildlife. And they have a rhyme and a reason. And hey, it may change how you were hunting that area. Give it some time and it's going to make it even better. So all those tops were left down there for a purpose, not to be lazy, but that was meant to be down woody debris on the ground to create, get cover for the regeneration, get some down woody debris for a critter to live in, for birds, for rabbits,
I thought that was because to make it more difficult for the deer to browse in some of those areas for regen.
Multiple good things happen out of that. So you see all those tops and stuff down. I mean, I'm not much of a jackrabbit hunter, but if you're hunting jackrabbits, you're going into those thick areas, and wherever the dogs get into them, it's probably right off the edge of a treetop. There's critters living in them. Multiple times I've booted out a bear who was getting ready to den in a massive oak top that just came out of a timber harvest that makes its little den in there and nuzzles in. So, I look at it as, hey, that top is there to protect that next cohort of regeneration on the forest floor, but it's serving multiple purposes. Mm-hmm. Because after it starts breaking down, it's going to decompose, it's going to add to the quality of the soil, it's creating cover for wildlife, whether it be a rabbit, a rodent, something from a hawk or an owl coming down and dive bombing it. Mm-hmm. So there's, and then too, when those tops are on the ground, immediately they're a source of browse for deer. So, I just rattled off 4 things that come out of the positive of leaving tops on the ground.
Yes. But I will say, I think it was probably 5 years ago now. I texted you because that was the first time that I had seen that. And this is a relatively new practice, right? That of leaving, I shouldn't say new practice, but it's happening more so I'm noticing it. And I remember coming through the spot where I'd been hunting it. And I'm like, what the heck? They just came through. I can't even get through it. They left all these tops down. It's a mess.
Yeah, and most of the stems were what? From the size of your thumb to the size of your arm?
Yeah.
So what they were doing is cutting that junk, getting rid of mainly black birch, American beech, getting that out from the understory because it's, one, you want that competition out of the stand for the desirable regeneration that didn't come the first time. So usually when that's happening, it's because a second treatment has to take place. And we could probably start backtracking of the ages of those stands. And they're probably, 10 to 20 years old when that deer herd was still pretty high.
Yep.
Right on that cusp. So all the desirable regeneration, the oak, the maple, deer really don't browse cherry, but, really looking oak, maple, ash, tulip poplar, basswood, hickory, I can rattle them all off. When the deer herd was super high, they browsed them all out. So the undesirable browse species, a lot of black birch, straight maple, American beech, and then the one desirable saw timber tree that deer don't prefer is black cherry. So that, and I can go down a rabbit hole. If you look at a lot of 30, 40-year-old pole stands, they're almost like black cherry monocultures because the deer browsed out all the diversity.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, that makes total sense. But like when I first saw that though, it was from a hunting standpoint. And this is just me looking at it selfishly, a hunting standpoint. I was like, this makes this really difficult. Why are they doing that? And that was one of the points of that article was people were pissed because they couldn't get to their spots and get in and do that. And because they're like, this is dangerous. I got to go over blowdowns and, not blowdowns, they're tops, but like blowdowns.
Tops. And it's, for every, what's the saying? For every action, there's a positive or negative reaction. Well, I look at it as a positive, but also if I was the one hunting it, I'd be like, oh man, this sucks. It's going to kind of change where, it's going to change the pattern of my deer. It's going to change how I'm going to hunt, how I can access it, how this, how that. But I'm going to be like, man, all right, might have to go to plan B, but this spot's going to be jamming in a couple years.
Yeah, see, and that's what I was just going to bring up that's why I believe it's so important to have multiple areas that you scout, that you start to know, and that you have in your back pocket, even if you're someone that's a weekend warrior, which it sounded like that probably was the case with a lot of that. And I understand, like you have a spot you've been going to, it's tradition to go hunt there, but the game commission or anybody that's doing the forest management, that's not their first priority when it comes to, it's to the wildlife and creating better habitat for that. And also the future of the timber and everything else that comes along with it. That's what comes first. And it's just really, to me, it's a little roadblock that they're gonna do some construction and it's gonna be back. Yeah. And it's probably gonna be better when it's definitely gonna be better when it's
exactly. It's just like you're working on your car. You drive your car every day, and then all of a sudden you got to fix it. You got to sit for a couple weeks while it gets fixed. And then once you get it back on the road, it's rolling. And that's the one thing is like, hey, forests change, forests age. They're just like people.
Yeah.
And that's a whole nother thing that we're going to, is going to be looked at over the next 20 years is the dynamic of the forest is changing. It's aging just like us. When we first met, a little bit more, maybe we're a little bit more mature than we are now.
Yeah.
I'll say we're more mature now than we were then.
Yeah.
Those forests are the same thing where they're, a lot of things are changing in the forest and the overstory.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And two, all right, so one other thing I wanted to ask you about is what are, we talked before Gypsy moth about being a threat, and that's still seemingly a threat to the woods. So do you want to explain a little bit about the status of Gypsy moth?
I'll say that it's in Pennsylvania, they spray thousands of acres every year for Gypsy moth. And it's kind of like in our region in the Northwest, North Central, we had really big infestations in 2021, 2022, 2023, and then it just worked its way east. And a lot of it is it eats itself out of house and home, it overpopulates, it gets killed by viruses and bacteria, and just kind of self-regulates its population. And very aggressive management activities and spraying for those gypsy moths. So, really on a state level, it should be quite a decline going into 2025 of the amount of acres impacted. But, and again, I'm still a little bit naive is like, hey, this is home. This is where I work up on the Allegheny Plateau. So the amount of oak stands that it's impacting is less than those in like Southern PA, Central PA, Far Eastern PA. Like that's something, it's a yearly activity, but it was massive populations. But we should be in a lot better spot. But this is also going to be, there was tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of acres that were not sprayed for gypsy moth that are going to be decimated, that those forests are going to be wiped out. And so there's going to be a lot of salvage harvesting going on. You're going to see a lot of change depending on where you're at in Pennsylvania that, if you did lose trees like from gypsy moth defoliation and they died, like, hey, it's going to change your dynamic. And oak is one of the species that it hits the hardest.
Yeah.
So, a spot that may have had a great oak crop 5 years ago and you're expecting one now, if it got hit by gypsy moths 2 years in a row, you could go into a dead forest stand. The state agencies, the Game Commission, and the DCNR are like gearing up for salvage harvesting. I was talking to a couple of my buddies that are foresters there, and they're like, man, we just want to mark a green timber sale where things are healthy and you're not, you can't spray every acre. You just can't afford to. So it's trying to prioritizing, the Game Commission looks at wildlife health of what stands need to be sprayed, and the state has theirs, the DCNR has their system of doing it. I'm not as familiar with it. I'm sure it's not just the value of the timber. There's so much more to go into it of recreations, aesthetics, wildlife health, and of course timber health. We got to have a healthy forest in the overstory if we're going to have healthy forests in the future.
Yeah.
But there's a lot, but I will say there's always trying to find the positive in every negative. When we're doing timber harvest, to strictly looking at it, not at the value of timber, but as the health of the forest, we're trying to mimic Mother Nature in timber harvest, to get sunlight on the forest floor, to release regeneration. Some of the best regenerated oak stands I have ever seen were decimated by gypsy moth, because it's just the way Mother Nature was, and could have been dumb luck. There was a great oak crop the year before, and they got totally wiped out the following year by gypsy moth. So right now it is full sunlight all the time. So, those shade intolerant species got full sunlight and were able to take off.
Yeah.
So Mother Nature always has its way of taking care of the forest. But, and then you can go down the rabbit hole of it also is going to spread invasive plants and pests, because the invasives love sunlight as much or more than the trees we're trying to grow. And it seems like every time you turn around, there's a new invasive that we're fighting. It's truly just a battle. And it's not just here, it's everywhere. Like, some foresters I work with down in like the southern part of the US, the amount of I'm complaining about invasives and how much money we have to spend to control the invasives. And it's like, hey man, you do what you got to do, because we're dealing with that plus 5 more things in the south. So it's kind of crazy.
That is wild. And like because everybody, when you deal with, or whatever you experience in your area is what you think is the most important, or that's just what you're familiar with.
Yeah.
But then you see some of these other places, and I've been to other places, I'm like, holy cow, like this is bad.
Right.
Like, there's a lot of invasives that are taking over.
Yeah. Like I joke around, we'll just kind of stick like within PA. I always joke around that like our region, the Allegheny Plateau, we live in our little bubble. We have really good, we always had really good, now I'll say pretty good timber markets. There's a lot of sawmills around, a lot of industry, good jobs, always, a way to manage the resource. We have the paper mill, which is great for on a management level to manage, timber stands to get rid of the low value product that, wouldn't make logs or lumber. So, the paper mill is so important to managing a forest. So we always had good markets to move all the products so we could keep managing our forest correctly. And like our invasive problem wasn't that bad. We'd up until recently didn't have to deal much with Japanese knotweed that you see in a lot of the riverbanks. That kind of looks like bamboo.
Yep.
So that one just spreads like wildfire. We're kind of immune to it, other than in the river valleys. You didn't see it spread into the forest. Japanese stiltgrass, which kind of stayed south of 80, didn't really have much issues with it, but I'm seeing it everywhere. It doesn't matter where I go, I see it. Which is a problem, and never really saw it 10 years ago. Buckthorn, which we can walk out your back door and find buckthorn. And this is one, me personally, I just kind of like, hey, turn a blind eye to it. I know it's a problem, and I know it's a problem over there, but I don't see it on my properties that I manage. Where now it's like, all right, open your eye. You got to look at it on a landscape level. Because the only thing separating it is a highway. And even my arm that's worn out, I could still throw a baseball and get it over that highway. What do you think a bird can do carrying that seed?
Yeah.
And it starts spreading. I mean, so managing the forest, dealing with invasives, and, I could probably hook you up with someone way better than me to get into the weeds of it. But
the weeds.
See, you like that? That's pretty good. It's a crazy problem and a crazy expense to manage a forest properly. So that's, it's something to think about, whether, like folks that are listening are landowners, or what they're noticing on the landscape of like, hey, you're seeing Japanese barberry, even multiflora rose. Like we talked about that at the scouting camp. I think I pointed out one pro of like, hey, in small doses, it's okay. I'm not saying it's good. Deer will browse it, critters will hide in it, but you don't want to see it take over the landscape. So, but that's, I just rattled off already 5 different invasives that weren't really, they were talked about, but not as big of an issue on a landscape level. Like on a micro level, they were always talked about, but now it is landscape level issues that we're dealing with and managing the forest. And, and some folks look at, the value, if someone goes in and looks at a forest and looks at timber as just timber, not a forest, and managing it for the future, just a value extraction. It's like, hey, that's an asset. Get me my cash for those trees and I'm out. Well, if you have invasives, you're going to have a forest floor that's filled with, Japanese stiltgrass and buckthorn. But if you don't do anything to manage for it, you aren't going to have that next cohort of regeneration coming in. So it really is so important, and how it spreads. Like, a lot of people, well, what can we do to prevent it? Well, hey, when you come up, whether, you're from downstate, Ohio, here, there, anywhere, when you go to your cabin, you go to your property, you go to your hunting lease, like really think about, hey, I was ripping and tearing on my side-by-side at, my buddy's farm, and, oh, I see that stilt grass. Clean off your side-by-side before you come up here. Like, hey, you're ripping, you're riding your e-bike into some, a Game Lands property or DCNR property or whatever, somewhere, and you see stilt grass and you drive through it and like, hey, I'm going to this other region. Well, clean your bike off before you come up. Like that's a lot of how it spreads is hitchhikers. It's us, it's the people that kind of love it to death.
Yeah. 'Cause I was going to say like, why, you could say like, oh, Mother Nature intended for all that to happen, like just letting it go, but that's not the case. Mother Nature didn't intend for a lot of these invasives to happen. It's humans that are the one that are doing
humans. People are the problem all the time.
That's true. That is very true.
Like the emerald ash borer. Now it's like if you find a healthy ash tree in our region, in our state, you're like, hot dang, like, wow, is it going to survive? No, probably not. Like a 1% chance.
So, okay. So, you're talking about that. What about cherry trees? What's going on with cherry trees?
Age. So cherry economically matures at about 80 to 100 years. It hits its peak of growth. It's at, its prime. It's at its prime, consider like a 30 to 45, 50, I'm sure everyone, my dad, I'm still in my prime at 65. Well, you're in that prime age. That's when it's, hit its peak of growth, but then it starts biologically maturing at 100, 120 plus years old. I'm given a wide range there, but, so it's just biologically maturing. And there's, now there is research being done on it. I was at a conference this summer, like on the National Forest Research Lab is researching, one of their big things is cherry health, and they're looking back at soil composition. Now, this is theory, and this comes from me, doesn't come from anyone else. People can call me out on it, whatever. But one of the things, they're finding a lack of nitrogen. Nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, they're finding lacks of it in the soil. It's depleting. So the one thing, cherry is a very much nitrogen hog tree species. So if we look back in history, and I was talking about our shade intolerant species, right? So the whole state of Pennsylvania, we can look back in history. Those that don't know, more or less the timber barons clear-cut Pennsylvania. The whole state of Pennsylvania, they say you could see from one side to the other, everything was clear-cut. So you take that, and I like easy math. We'll use during the Industrial Revolution, 1900, right? Simple math is good for me. So, that was done, late 1800s, early 1900s. So we're going to say 1900 for an even number. Well, at that time also, the deer herd was darn near extinct, right? It was, during the early 1900s, like they had to import deer here from Wisconsin, Michigan, other places. They brought deer in because the deer herd was so low. So you take massive clear cutting, you take a super low deer herd, and here's the one that's kind of conspiracy theory in a way, but not coming out to be not so much. You take the acid rain that was coming in. Well, that acid rain was a natural nitrogen deposition into the soil. So you look, now you look west. You look Pittsburgh, the Allegheny River Valley, Ohio River Valley, industry, coal, steel, that helped build America, the Industrial Revolution. Well, all those steel mills, you think they had filters on their exhaust systems? Heck no, they're blowing pollution up into the air. Well, some of that pollution was nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, so it's going up into the clouds, into the ecosystem, and it's getting dumped. So it was naturally fertilizing our soil. So the pollution that was killing us, in a way, was giving back to the soil.
That is definitely a different take on it.
A different take on it. It's a very different take on it, but they're finding in soil samples that as things changed, less and less nitrogen is in the soil. So, is there a paper published on it? No, but they're researching it.
Interesting. And is it only cherries that need that amount of nitrogen? Or is that
they're one of the biggest nitrogen hogs, but all the species need it.
Okay.
They all need nitrogen. They all need
But they're like a
fertilizer.
Because what I've been seeing, and it's not in one specific area. It's in anywhere I go that has a decent amount of cherries. I'm seeing the tops being dead,
dying back,
and then like I go to climb in them if I'm going to hunt out of them, and then I realize they're like hollow.
Oh, this is dead,
and I'm like, I got to get out of here. A windstorm could blow this baby over.
So a lot of it is age, lack of nitrogen, and the forests are just over mature. It's kind of like now we're going into these cherry stands, and we aren't seeing we had a really good cherry seed crop this year, right?
Mm-hmm.
We were telling that to my dad at the office. We're like, man, we got a good seed crop. He goes, you don't even know what good was. 30 years ago, we'd be like, the world's coming to an end if the seed crop was that bad that year. And we're saying how good it is.
Real.
Yeah. Yeah. They're just like, no, you don't understand. You'd look up into the treetops, and it was red from all the cherries. And it was like we say like in oak stands, walking on marbles, right? Like you're just walking across. And we went on a tour. The National Forest gave us a tour for our Society of American Forestry group. And they're like, hey, look how great this regeneration is. And I was with a couple of the older guys I've known since I was a little kid. And I said, Mike, Dave, I said, was this good 30 years ago? And they're just like, no. We'd be like freaking out how bad it is. And, and a lot of it is just the health of it. So you got to look is the amount of seed that's hitting the ground is less. And the health of those trees is not as, kind of like people with genetics. It's like going to the nursing home to repopulate the world.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Yeah. So it, and that's a lot of it. We're seeing it. A client of mine out in Tioga County, marked a timber sale for him, and we were doing actually a project with the Rough Grouse Society, getting early successional habitat on his property. And he goes, Kenny, you got to come over here and look at it. Look at this. He goes, these oak trees just died, and he was kind of chewing my ass a little bit because he just spent a ton of money to spray his 500 acres for gypsy moth the year before. And I'm like, geez, John, I can't guarantee every tree survive. He goes, well, no, there's 3 that died, but how did the rest on my 500 acres survive? I'm like, I don't know. It could be a myriad of things. I'm thinking, well, it could be oak wilt, it could be root rot, it could be a different thing. So called one of the pathologist foresters at DCNR. I said, hey, Sarah, will you come look at this and take some samples? She goes, yeah, absolutely. We went out, looked, and the answer we got was oak decline. It's just mature. The stressors from, frost events, from wind events, from the gypsy moth defoliation, from drought, all that has a factor. A lot of time, we had a really bad gypsy moth infestation 2-3 years ago. We had a pretty bad drought. So last summer, kind of even this summer, we had a heck of a drought.
Yeah, and
all that's a stressor.
Yeah, was it in 24 we had a bad drought, or 20? No, it was 23.
23.
Like for the fall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That made sense.
Yep. And then in 22, we had a really late frost. So all the trees were budded out, and that late frost kills those buds off, and that's a stressor because they got to take all that energy into regrowing those out, and that's stress on the trees, and all has an impact.
Yeah, definitely. It's crazy. It's our the ecosystem, and you're looking at the forest. They are so, how do I want to put it? It's so finicky as far as little things here, and there's so many things that need to go right.
Yeah.
To make it work. And there's a lot of things that can go wrong with it too.
So much. And it's hey, we could have everything planned out perfect. We go into this oak stand and we set up a perfect shelter wood, and we got cover on the ground, but we don't have a good oak crop for 5-6 years. And the undesirable regeneration gets a jump on it, and it could just, so much could change where you think you're doing everything right. But and maybe that's why I like forestry so much. It's not an exact science. There's, there's a lot of hey, you got to figure it out as it goes. And, if it doesn't work out, then you're stuck doing, what we were talking about with all the birch and going in and cutting all that out to, try to start over again.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And like I said, I never knew all of that stuff, even all the stuff that goes into a timber cut of why some look different than others. And there's so many more that even, an untrained eye wouldn't even be able to identify when you could go into a specific shelter wood cut to another one and how they could be different. And there's so much that goes to it. All right, Kenny. So I did want to, before we get in the story of your deer, I got a couple of kind of somewhat rapid fire questions for you on some terms, some things for people to think about. All right. Different types of timber cut. Say you're on Spartan Forge or whatever, and you're looking and you see a timber cut on a piece of federally owned land, because that's where most of that's listed on, and it says a shelter wood cut or tell me what those cuts are, what the names are, and then just a brief description. Okay.
So shelter wood cut would be one of the initial harvests that would be going in, where the goal of that shelter wood cut, the goal is to get regeneration started. It is not to promote growth upon the overstory trees that are there. It is to open up the overstory to get sunlight on the forest floor. So you're cutting out a lot of the inferior trees, the suppressed and co-dominant. So that's where you're going to see a lot of pulpwood, smaller wood size trees, lower value logs, and the trees that are left are, our term, the hog daddy seed trees, the big oak, the big cherry, the big maple. Those are the ones that we want dumping the seed to get that regeneration started. So that, shelterwood harvests are one of my favorites to go in and hunt, because you still have a lot of trees to pick from where to hang a stand. You have skid trails that then become access and travel corridors. And you're still going to have, if it's in an area that's oak, for example, you're going to still have those mass producing trees. So you're double dipping a food source, and you're bringing in cover to that stand as well.
Yeah. You have mass producing trees. You have
browse
security cover, and you got browse all in one location, which can make that tough because they can bed in the same areas
as they can be feeding.
But it gives you know where the deer are.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the start.
You see shelterwood, head in. Yeah. Head in. Go scout that area, go look.
And I know it depends on the area and how fast things regenerate, but for me personally, in that 3 to 8 year old time frame is when I really like those cuts, because that's when you get that browse that's growing up enough that creates that cover and that security. But
yeah, my favorite time to hunting shelter woods right after they're harvested. Bow season is tough because you're impacting that travel corridor and kind of the system that those deer have. But me personally, like if I see a shelterwood cut being done, that I love rifle hunting it.
oh yeah,
Yeah, like that is the afternoon when the skitters shut off. That's the dinner bell for the deer. Like, it's a great time and place to go hunt those in gun season. But you're right. In that 3 to 8, that's when it's jamming because that regeneration's gonna, start going year 1, 2, 3. It's in that browse stage. 4, 5, 6. It's kind of flirting out of that browse stage and it's in a cover stage. Then once you get past that 8, it's out of the browse stage and it's mainly a cover, looking bedding area.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay, so what's another type of cut?
Okay, so another one, we'll backtrack to one and call it thinning.
Okay.
So a thinning, you don't see them. I mean, we do them, but they're not as common as they were 25, 30 years ago. And that'll go into like what we were just talking about with the mature and over mature forest is like, the thinning is done to promote growth on trees. So you're going in, thinning out the poorer quality, the poorer growing trees. You aren't really opening it up enough to get regeneration. Regeneration isn't the focus, but something's always going to come about.
Yeah.
But a thinning is really meant to promote the growth of the crop tree of the dominant trees in that stand. Would I hunt it? Absolutely at a time, but it's not going to be like, hey, that is just going to hold a ton of deer because there's not going to be a lot of cover on the ground because not as many trees are being harvested. Mm-hmm. It's not going to get enough sunlight on the ground to get that regeneration, which is going to bring browse. So that kind of covers the thinning end of it. And then kind of in our region, you see thinnings, you see shelter woods, and then you see clear cuts. And clear cuts are one of my favorites and also ones that I hate because they can be so difficult because you have so much food, so much cover, so much everything in that area.
Yep.
But it is super good on a landscape level for wildlife as a whole. So in a clear cut, it is when truly there is very few trees per acre left. It is for full sunlight. So one, you're taking out the value of the timber, and two, you are getting full sunlight on the forest floor. And that's when you're starting to grow your next forest. And again, I love hunting those for, from year 1 of being done, but then you're also looking at it as the shelter wood's done. And then anytime once that regeneration is ready, when it's dealing with the deer browse and it's past that line, that's when the clear cut would take place. And those can happen from 3 years after to 5 years after to 8, 10, 12 years after. But truly they should be done in that 3 to 8 year range is when the clear cut should take place after the shelter wood.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So and I just saw that in one of my areas here. Well, actually, I think it got delayed a little bit because the understory, the new growth, wasn't the desired species. It was getting taken over by beech. So they came through and they actually sprayed it. The herbicide sprayed it. And then a few years later, as you started some more new growth coming in, then they went through and they clear cut it.
Yep. Yeah. So the goal of that is like, hey, we failed on time number 1 without spraying and we didn't get regeneration. So, hey, let that, let the brush get up head high. We'll go in, spray it with the machine, wipe it out. Those trees are still in the overstory, dropping seed on the ground. And once that regeneration gets a flush, time to start that forest over.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so changing gears a little bit.
Yep.
You had mentioned it earlier, but I want you just to say it again for people that missed it. This is Pennsylvania specific, but you can take this and apply it and learn in your own area if you have different tree types. What are the top browsing tree types that deer like and what don't they like?
Okay, so one, oaks. They love all the oaks. They'll browse the heck out of the oaks. Maples, red maple, sugar maple, very high preferred browse species. Tulip poplar, very high preferred. White ash, we're actually getting a lot of ash regeneration, even though all the trees in the overstory are dying. and that is, well, I'll go over those and then I'll get back to why we're getting a lot of ash. Yeah. But really, those are some of the biggest. I know I'm forgetting some, but basswood, cucumber, they said tulip poplar, pretty much everything we want to grow other than beech, black birch, black cherry. Black cherry, is a preferred saw timber species, but deer don't like it. I guess it's like super acidic or something. But then it's like, how many times, I don't know if you do it, I do. You go through the woods and you see a black birch branch, you bite it off and you chew on it. It tastes like birch beer, root beer. It's like, how do deer not like this? It tastes good. Like, I've chewed on other branches. I'm like, why do they like this? I'm like, it literally tastes like dirt. Like, let's get those deer trained to eat black birch. If they did, foresters would love deer. We would love them. I'd be like, no, stop. I'd have my sign, stop deer hunting,
Yeah. Yeah, you'd be joining the animal rights.
Yeah, I'd be the ringleader of it if we could grow better trees. So those are some of the biggest targets. Is some of the most valuable saw timber species are also some of the most valuable wildlife species.
Interesting.
And then the ones nobody wants are the ones that grow the best.
Of course.
Yeah.
That's exactly how that works.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
No, I wanted to hit on that again. That's something that, again, at the scouting camp, we go over and show, which ones and you can see it because you can see where they're browsing on it. And that's a way, if you don't know the different tree types until you get to learn them, just look at them.
Yeah.
Look at the regen and seeing if they're browsing on it and they're nibbling.
Yep.
And
if you see it growing, if you're like, man, that tree looks, why is it so much shorter? And you can see that the bud's browsed off and you have another one that's growing like this. Yeah. You could be looking at like a red maple or a sugar maple, red oak, white oak compared to a black birch. You're going to see that difference. Yeah.
And I think I need a partnership with this app, the picture of this app, because I talk about it so much, but it's an app that you can use and take a picture of it. So you see something like that, you see they're browsing on it, take a picture of it if you don't know what it is, and it'll tell you what type of tree it is. And remember that, put it in your memory banks, and you see more of that. It's like, okay, deer like to feed on this.
And then you remind me too, I think I had enough for all the participants in the school, but not for all the instructors. The tree ID book went a long way. So thanks for reminding me to get a case of those. Get some of those. I'll get some of those.
And not sure at the time when this episode comes out, but if at the time of recording this, it's a couple days after registration went live, and we still do have some openings on general admission for the scouting camp. So all the VIP sold out in less than a couple minutes, but we still have a few openings in general admission. So if you want to come learn from Kenny and everybody else, then head over to eastmeetswesthunt.com/scouting.
Yeah, it's all that is seriously one of the, I look forward to that weekend every year. It is so much fun.
It is
so much fun. Like, everyone that shows up is just, haven't met a bad person that showed up. This is year number 4. Like, created a lot of long-term friends out of it. I learn as much from people asking questions of, sometimes I'm like, well, you just know that. And it's like, I kind of got to open my own eyes to it. So I learn a lot to then, hopefully be able to teach other people better, whether it be, people that come to the school, whether it be clients, whether it be students that I get to go back. And I still can't believe my old professors bring me back to Penn State to talk to students, as all they wanted me was out of there when I was there. So, it helps me learn as well.
Yeah, no, I learned so much from everyone that's there. Not like I said, not only just the instructors, but the people that are coming there. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot of people that come to the scouting camp that probably don't even need to be there, as far as they are good deer hunters. They understand it. Yeah. I think they come to hang out and have the camaraderie. And that's what's so fun about it. Like, selfishly, I have a ton of fun there. It's not
so much fun.
It's not work for me to be there and hanging out with everybody and go through it.
Like, it's an honor to be there with everyone. Like, it's so much fun.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this year. And we actually go to a property now that Kenny manages, so he has the history of it, the understanding, and you can really get to understand these forest types and learn it, so that if you go somewhere, you can see it. Now, when we did it at Kip's property, it was awesome too, but there wasn't as much from the timber management there. That was more of a lot of bigger timber, type stuff, which has, a lot of people hunt those types of places too. But this has such a variety of different timber harvests and different ages of it and terrain. It's got everything.
The only thing it's lacking, doesn't have like that massive oak stand, but we got one that we can kind of work around. And I've been looking through the inventory data of that property. I'm like, all right, I think I can find one more that maybe we go to another end of it and figure something out. But you get to see so much, like, because what we're doing, managing private, and this is an investment company. It's a company out of Atlanta that owns it. Like, we're managing, a sustainable resource, like looking for the future. But yes, we have to generate revenue for this landowner. That's why they own it. But they give us all the tools in the toolbook to do it no different than what any of like the government agencies would, and sometimes I'll even say we do it better. But I'm partial to what we do.
Yeah. Because you have a business.
Yeah.
You're just trying to make money.
Yeah.
That's all you're trying to do.
Got to stay afloat.
You don't give a damn.
That's what some people
joking.
think. I know. That is what some people think. And it's like, well, hey, why? But it helps educate where, some people look at like public land supposed to be this pristine, preserved, all natural. It's like, hey, this is a resource we need to manage. So you got to see how it really gives you a chance to see how it's done and the why it's done.
Yep. Yeah. And I think what's helpful for forestry in general are people like yourself that, one, you're a hunter and you're also a forester, and being able to explain to people the benefits of both. And yes, this is a resource that we need to take advantage of, and there's monetary value that comes along with it, but why it's good for the forest in general and being able to, and wildlife, 110% benefit from it. I don't know how anybody could argue that. And
huge.
But what I was going to say about that is I think some of the older generations just kind of had the attitude, well, if you don't like it, like, get screwed. Like, that was where where it's like, hey, we got to educate one another with it. And it's a lot more comes of it where, maybe my dad and his guys, well, I'll piss on you. Well, no, hey, let me teach you. I'm going to take this as a teaching moment, show you the what and the why we're doing it. Yeah.
And usually it's like the glass shattering effect. They're like, oh my God. Like I see what the benefit is. So that's what I really enjoy.
Yeah, man, it is cool. I think you do a really good job at it, and you go and speak at different other things, not just the scouting camp, but you go to a lot of places where people aren't a fan of it.
I will get to go promote the some people may hate me now after this, but I'll be at the Game Commission here, bag limit hearing this weekend, testifying on, hey, you guys are doing like a really good job. Like, thanks for giving us the tools to keep managing our forest. And I'm sure the next person up will say there's no deer and I'm an asshole, and that. But it's impossible to get everybody to agree on those things. Right.
But okay, so going back, let's transition to deer season.
Oh man,
you shot an absolute hammer of a deer. Like,
dude, like
anybody's watching the video version here, like, this thing is an absolute giant. You've been sending me photos of them for a few years now. 3
years. I've been chasing this deer, like knowing it was this deer for 3 years. Now I will say I don't have an official age on it, as I took him to the taxidermist getting mounted. Like, I wasn't going to screw anything this up, to worry about the age, but I'm going to say 5.5 for sure. Maybe 6.5, because I know, 3 years ago, my first picture of him, he was a really nice 120-inch deer. I'm like, oh my gosh, like he's freaking jamming. And, and I just been trying to chase him and had a run in with him 3 years ago. I was hunting this buck with my buddy Opie, and we were hunting different ends of this cut, and he saw him, I saw him, and he gave us a slip. Right, rifle season that same year. My dad saw him, gave him the slip. Last year, or 2 years ago, bow season, saw him just like, and I'm hunting the same area. I have pictures of him at the same spots for 3 years now, bouncing between a couple different couple different cuts and what was going on with it. And then Last year had another encounter. Last year on the first day of gun season, everyone in our camp saw him but me. Everyone. And I'm like, all right, well, okay, someone shoot him. I don't care if it's me or my dad or Mike or Opie. Someone kill this thing, you know? Yeah. And so it's like, all right, here we go, back in, put my cameras up where I always do, and I am lazy with it. I'm like, hey, well, I know this deer's here. I'm just going to put 3-4 cameras up. We had our run-ins. Opening week, second week. Well, I guess I'll go back to, put cameras up June, have pictures of them, watching them grow. I'm like, holy shit, like this is a good deer. I sent you some pictures.
Oh yeah.
Showed it to your dad, and he's like, oh man, like this is a stud. So the week before season, went out, putting new batteries, moving some cameras around, and I bump him out of his bed, and I'm like, this is nuts, And now I'm getting ready to leave for New Mexico to go elk hunting in, the right before the opening weekend. So my sister gets married on the opening day archery season. I leave on Sunday to go to New Mexico. I'm just like nervous as heck. Who else is hunting this deer? Like, this is public ground where I got this deer. So I'm losing sleep over it, looking for pictures, a cell cam, and nothing's coming in. I'm like, whatever, we'll figure it out. Get home that next week, me and Opie are out there hunting, and he comes under him at dark, can't see him, knew it was him. We had a picture of him right there 15 yards away. Couldn't do anything. And I'm like, there's no way. And he's like, dude, it's the biggest deer ever, like you got to see this. And then cell cam pic comes through, and I'm like, you're kidding me. It's 15 yards away, and you couldn't do it. Black dark, like that's the way it was. So then it was a couple weeks later, and I called you. I'm like, dude, I need some advice. Like how, I'm seeing them here. I got a couple pictures. This is where I got stands hung. I'm thinking, and it's a big clear cut. Like it's a 150 acre clear cut. So I know where I bumped him out of his bed. Like I was telling you, I'm like, hey, there's 2 hemlock trees, and there's literally nothing to hang a stand in. And the way the terrain was, like it just wasn't a good ground spot. And I'm like, hey, what do you think? And you're like, dude, get in there and be aggressive. Like, just get in there and get after it. And you bump them, whatever. Like, you're going to go into the rut. And if there's does around, he'll be back.
Yeah.
So, I'm trying to think back. It was Friday, the 25th, 26th of October, whatever that. I guess I could look. Can't really read it. Whatever that day was. Yeah. Friday, October 25th. Bail out of work. The guys that work with me, if they hear this, I left at 1:30. That's all right. And so me and Opie meet up. And we're like, hey, let's just run and gun. Threw my saddle on, but I had my one lightweight stand because I'm going to hang it. So like either one of us can hunt out of it's there, running and gunning, hang our set. And I go to those hemlock trees. And I'm like, ain't it? This just ain't it. So we go over, and now back in forester mode, there's an SMZ, a stream management zone, where no timber's cut. And I'm like, hey, what about this? Because we got a trail running here, a skid trail running here, found some scrapes. And I'm like, all right, let's, but it was not going to be an easy shot. And then there's a trail running between. And we're like, all right, let's do it. Hung the stand, 3 o'clock, set it, bail out. Went running and gunning, got Opie hung up in another spot, got his lone wolf set up. And I'm like, all right, see it dark. And more or less we were just running and gunning, like prepping for tomorrow, prepping for Saturday to do an all day or something, just scout around, like gearing up for the next 2 weeks. And sitting there chilling, like climb in, t-shirt, not t-shirt, like long john shirt, walk in. And I'm like, all right, cooling down a little bit, threw my ambient hoodie on, just chilling. And I'm like, all right. So now I go back to work. I'm like, man, nothing's going to come in until 5:30, 5:45, something like that. So sending emails, actually trying to be productive. So I got my work time back. Yep. So any of the guys hold that against me. I don't think anyone will for that.
Yeah.
And
if they can't, they're fired.
Yeah, they're fired. They're done. So, or my dad, he can't fire me now. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
So sitting there sending emails, and I'm like, all right, well, 4:45, and one of my clients texts me, he goes, hey, you hunting that big buck that you showed me a picture of? I said, yeah. And we're texting back and forth, talking about work. And then I'm like, all right, phone's away. Phone in my pocket, and I'm like, oh, my back's hurting. I'm going to stand up a little bit. And stand up, and I look over to my left, and I'm like, oh, there's something moving in this clear cut. So I'm in this SMZ, the Stream Management Zone, a spring seep going through. So it's thick with trees and brush and whatnot. And then there's a little swale of a clear cut, and then another spring seep, another SMZ that we'll call it Stream Management Zone. And then it's clear cut, for the next 300 yards.
So, like, how old is the clear cut?
4 years.
Okay.
4 years. And it is, even though I'm hunting it, I see a lot of deer, but it's like on that verge of too many deer. Like, it's getting overbrowsed. I'm like, this should be taller.
Yep.
Should be taller. But I'm like, it's a jamming spot, but it's thickening up good.
So let me ask,
Yep.
I don't mean to interrupt your story,
No, not
but
at all.
the SMZs, are they like angled like at a V, like away from each other? They angled towards each other, like, or
kind of
like
make like a
parallel.
They're kind of parallel, but then they make like a finger, almost like a opposite three with the hillside. Is the way there was 3 of them. Then the spring seep goes. They all kind of flow into one spring seep, and then it goes down into the stream.
Okay, gotcha.
Yep. So it's kind of set up that way, and I look and I'm like, oh, something moving. All right, here we go. See a deer, and I'm like, holy shit, that's a shooter. And I had a couple different shooters, but this was the one. And I told everyone, like, I will pass up every deer I see until I see him. I think I told you that.
Yeah.
Said it to your dad. Said it to my buddies. I told my dad this, and I'm sitting in my head, I'm like, yeah, freaking right, man. Yeah, right. I'm like, I got a couple like 110s, 120s. One of them come in. You think I'm passing those up? No way.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. So I'm like, man, all right, that's a shooter. So I grab my bow. I'm standing there, hook up my release is hooked up, and I'm like, all right. And I see movement. I'm like, where's he at? And I'm like, oh, he's dogging a doe. Well, then he was like with a little basket 6, and this 6 starts working this scrape, and I'm like, all right, where's he at? Well, he comes out of that spring seep, and there he is, and I'm shaking like a leaf. Like, I knew it was a good buck. I didn't know it was this buck, and I'm like, all right, well. So I knew where all the ranges were. I knew that scrape was 38 yards, and I knew where he was. I'm like, that's 42 yards. It's one I'm no Levi Morgan, but my job is to judge heights and distance of trees. I can come up with a pretty good yardage. So I'm like, all right. So I'm like, if he's going to come under me, he's going to go up, he's going to go down, everything's going to be well and good. Well, as I'm sitting there shaking like a leaf, that 6 point, I'm not paying attention to him. I'm now locked in on this guy. And he busts me. He stomps, and I'm like, well, now or never. I draw, settle my pin, and I just hear and I'm like, there's no way. There's no way I just did this. Absolutely not. No way. So I'm just standing there completely frozen, just completely frozen in time. And he runs down this spring seep, and like I said, it makes like this, this 3, and I can see him below me at like 55 yards. I can't process to grab another arrow, put it in my bow, and like get ready.
Yeah.
So then the 6 point starts coming up back to me, and I'm like, oh, this could happen. We could repeat and this happen again. But then I see him, and he, the big one, he breaks downhill, and I just sit down. I'm like, oh God, like freaking out. I text Opie. I'm like, I got an arrow in him. Like, now I'm like, I think it was him. I got an arrow in him. I'm like, but I'm not, I don't know, like, good shot, bad shot, and arrows in him. I'm like, hunt till dark, meet at the trucks. So now I'm sitting there back to like texting clients and, back to work.
Yeah. Trying to keep your mind
Trying
off
to keep my mind off it. And he's like, oh yeah, I hope the guy's like, yeah, I hope you get a shot at that buck this weekend. Little does he know, I got an arrow in him. And then my next door neighbor, he's hunting too, and I showed him a picture of the buck, and he's like, hey man, good luck this weekend. I know you're out hunting. And I'm like, yeah, I just hope things go my way, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, I got an arrow in him.
Yeah.
So I called my dad and I'm like, hey, get up here, get flashlights, meet me at this spot, and he knew where I was. And I'm like, all right, it's probably like an hour and 10 minutes, like from where my parents live. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to sit here for 45 minutes, chill. Right before dark, I'll go, look, find my arrow, do my thing.
Yep. I
get out of my tree, but now I'll sit. So now here's kind of a funny thing. So then after I shoot, I start hearing burp, burp, burp. I'm like, what is going on? And then I hear tines rattling. I'm like, it's not bucks fighting. There's someone sitting above me by 100 yards, hunting the same deer.
Oh my gosh.
There's this guy just hunting hard. And I can pull up my binos and I look. He had a crossbow sitting on the ground, rattling, scraping
on the ground. And he has
no
idea what happened down below him.
No. And I'm like, well, that sucks. But good for me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is absolutely crazy. So I get down, I walk, and I say I waited 45 minutes, probably like 25, and I'm still shaking like a leaf. I get down out of the tree. Opie calls me. He's like, I ain't sitting here any longer. I'll meet you at the truck. He goes, I just can't focus if this is what's going on.
Yeah.
Then I go walking up the hill, and there's my dad. And I'm like, how fast did you drive to get here? Like, there's no way you could get here that fast. He goes, well, I knew how big that buck could have been. He goes, I had to get here. I said, I hope you brought your truck and not your company truck driving like that. I got to give him a hard time because he'd do that to me.
Yeah.
So he's all amped up to go. I'm like, listen, we're all going to the truck. We're meeting at the truck. Let's just chill out for a little bit and go. So, my dad, Opie, and I are sitting there chilling, and everyone's amped up. And I'm like, all right, let's do this. And I found blood, found my arrow. Things looked pretty good. Looked good. But it doesn't matter if it's the perfect shot and you watch him die. You still, this is me. I still have doubt going, like he ran away or something like that. So we're going, and we got good blood, bad blood. And I'm just freaking out. I'm talking like just not puddles of blood from me to you away. And I'm like, oh my God, he's gone. Never going to find him. And we're going. It seems like a mile. And it's still like just getting dark. We needed lights, but maybe if you're in your stand, still right on that cusp of shooting light, and we're going, and it's like blood's picking up, and I'm on the trail, and now it's like that 5 minutes later where it's like, hey, if you're not on the light, you really can't see much. And I'm like, well, there's a deer trail that he's been following that the last 30 yards. And then I just hear my dad behind. It was me, Opie, my dad. And I just hear, holy shit. And he, and I'm like, Dad, where's the light at? Because he had a light over my shoulder. And he's just like, holy shit, there it is. And, so I'm looking here, and he was only like 10 feet away right there. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Still just could not, to be there with my best friend and my dad. It was the best experience of my life. It was insane.
Other than getting married.
That's,
you were just about to say that. And I was.
Thank you. Kelly will give you credit. That's what I was going to say. 2024 has been honestly the best year of my life. Get married in February. It's been a year that I've owned, and this spring it was a year that I owned the business. Got to go to New Mexico elk hunting. It was with my brother-in-law when he shot his first elk, which was awesome. And it was, this New Mexico trip meant a lot more than just going on this trip. So my dad and, his group of super good buddies went on this trip 3 years ago to New Mexico, and his best friend shot a 350-inch bull. And, they were together, and it was oh, this is amazing. They get home from the trip, time of their life. 2 weeks later, our friend Dan passes away. So it's super, super hard. So I got to go fill that spot, for our buddy Dan. Chokes me up thinking about it. To have that group of guys that have been friends forever, and I was always just the little kid running around where it's hey, we're all in New Mexico doing that together. Get home, a week and a half later and then kill that. 2024 is freaking jamming, like absolutely jamming. Like, you know, and after I get him and Kelly, you know, I'm showing this picture to my wife and she's just like, I don't know much, but that's a really big buck. Like, that's a really, really big buck. And then I'd be at home. I'm like, hey, I'm going hunting. She's just like, well, why are you hunting here when that buck is somewhere else? I said, well, I'm still going to hunt. And she goes, well, I don't get it. You said you only wanted this one. Why don't you go hunt that one? I'm like, I don't have the time. You know, I still got to work. So she let me, like, spare time. I could go, you know, was able to scout, able to do this. And she's just like, yeah, whatever. But then come gun season, she's like, hey, I thought you're done. I'm like, well, no, I still got to go to camp and be at camp every weekend for deer season and do this. I got to be there to help my dad and all the guys out. Like, what do you mean? She's like, whatever, go ahead.
Yeah. That's hilarious.
So it was freaking awesome.
Man, like, I remember when you sent me the picture that night, and you just sent me, and also you're terrible at taking photos, but you just
man.
You just took a photo, and it was just a deer on the ground, and I was like, "Oh my!" Because I recognized it right away. I was like, "That yours?"
And then I lost service for 2 hours.
Yeah, and then you didn't respond, and you're like, "Yeah." I was like, "That's him, right?" And you're like, Yeah. I was like, oh my gosh, dude. Because like we've talked about it so much, and it was just a few days before that, or maybe on your way driving.
I think it was. We were on the phone, and I'm like, hey, what do you think I need to do? And you're just like, hey, you dive in there. Go with it the Greg approach. Like, get in there, get down and dirty. Like, and again, like I'll go back to the scouting camp. And, you know, like in the picture on Instagram, I tagged all the guys because if it wasn't for all of you guys, I would not have picked up on anything enough to kill that deer. Like, I learned so much from you, from Mason, from Moose, from Greg, from Johnny, from Bill. Like, I learned so much where it's like, hey, I was able to piece all these things together from like knowing its area to getting in its home. You know, and I'll say like that'd be my testimony, like of the scouting camp. Like of and I'm also very partial to it, of taking part of like, I was able to be an okay hunter. I've killed some nice deer in my day. Like, I can't complain, but to be able to put the puzzle pieces together to kill this deer was, I mean, a lot of dumb luck. There ain't no doubt about it, a lot of dumb luck. But to be in the right place, right time. Like, if I didn't be there, one, as a presenter or be there as a student at the scouting camp, I wouldn't have thought to get more aggressive. Well, hey, I see him. I get a picture of him once every 2 weeks on this pipeline. So I wouldn't think to get, like, down into the weeds of it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, no, I mean, yeah. I mean, being around all those guys, like, you can pick up on so much, but at the same time, getting out of your comfort zone, like you choosing to get out of your comfort zone and go in there.
Yeah. I was totally out of my comfort zone.
Yeah. And that's huge. Like, you adapted to the situation. Yep. Like, I remember, when we were talking about it, and I had seen the area, you had actually taken me there to look at it.
So this is one of my favorites. So Mason, of course, Mason just kills big deer every year.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so where'd you get it? And he describes to a T, I don't know if he has a photographic memory or whatever, to a T to the spot that you, me, him, and Kurt went to. I got it right here. Yep, there's this big rock, and we drove this hill and made this switchback, and then we were standing on this. I was standing on this big rock. I'm like, you dick. Like, right to a T. I'm like, God dang it, Mason. I know I'll never get it out of you.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
That's so funny. But but seeing the area, first of all, laid out sweet. I mean, it was a really cool area. You had different ages of cuts that was through there. You had terrain, you had rocks, like, and those SMZs, like, going back to that, freaking love those. Yeah,
like, and that was the first time I really dove into it and hunted. I'd always sit back, and like, I've been a bow hunter my whole life, but like I grew up rifle hunting. Like, my dad wasn't a bow hunter; he was a rifle hunter. So I would get close enough, but I wouldn't dive in. Mm-hmm. You know, I'd just be like, well, I'm comfortable here. I can get in and out real easy. And that was always my fear, is like, you know, I'm a big, dumb, clumsy guy. Like, I'm not silent when I hang. I break out profusely sweating. It could be today. And if I went to hang my stand, look like I just got out of a bath.
Yeah. That's that's so funny. But, okay. So I just want to ask a little bit more about the spot. So you were saying a guy was above you, so you were on kind of the side hill?
Yeah. I was kind of like not super steep, but like right on the side hill where there was like a bench, and then it broke down real steep into this.
And you were on that bench?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you had the SMZs on both sides.
Both sides running downhill.
Yep. And you obviously could shoot to the edge of the one SMZ.
Yep.
And could you shoot to the other one too?
So I was in the one, and then I could shoot to the other side of it. So I had about a 20-yard shot, and then it was clear cut for about 200 yards.
That's okay.
Yes.
All right. I was just trying to paint a picture for everyone that was listening. But those SMZs so like basically when they do the cuts, they'll leave those strips of timber that along any of those waterways, even if it's just a spring steep.
Always want to protect the water.
Yeah, protecting the water, and that like there's areas that I hunt that I focus on those SMZs because it creates those travel corridors, and deer love edges, but they can run those edges or just inside them. I'll find scrapes in them. They're good camera locations. Like
because there ain't until I got there, and that's why I always stayed out of it. So like now I'll say behind me up on the flat is one of those 30-year-old pole stands, a cherry monoculture pole stand that's like that, where it's in that tweener stage. There's a little bit of browse in the understory, but it's not thick enough to bed in. But there was just a handful of trees left, and I'm like, well, this is comfortable. I can get a stand hung. There's like a Millennium or something I just hung in this stand, and it was a quick run and gun spot that you could get to. Where I keep saying I'd never go down into that because I just like, I could bust them. And now it's like, hey, that's where you got to be. You got to, take a gamble.
And that was like my thought that day is when I missed my big one.
Yeah.
Same day, the 25th. And we were like, but when you were laying out the situation, this is what it helps to have. We say it all the time, but it helps to have good friends to talk to, because I'm not emotionally attached to it from the standpoint that I can look at it clearer than you can.
Oh, for sure.
Of when I was like, dude, I would just go in there and it wasn't that you knew way more than me about it, but it was just, I'm not attached to it. And it's like, okay, this is what you've been doing. And you've seen them before, but it hasn't worked out. Like, and what do you got to lose?
Right. And now it's like, as you're saying that, I mean, if anyone's watching this, you probably just saw like my eyes light up. He ran that same freaking pattern 3 years in a row where we weren't taking those risks getting off that flat, getting off that pipeline, where we were seeing that deer. He ran that same trail. And it's like, you get out of that comfort zone. Like, well, I'm seeing him 100 yards away. I'm seeing him at 80 yards away. Well, take that gamble. Find that tree. Now, I will say, in those clear cuts, you're super limited on trees.
Yeah, you're super limited.
You're super limited on trees. But it was, found that right spot. I'd like, hey. And now I'll say Opie wanted to hang it over here, like on the next SMZ. And if I would have listened to him, I would have had an 8-yard shot.
Yeah.
So I'll give him credit.
Yeah. Or the wind could have swirled, blew him out.
Right. Anything could have happened. Anything could have happened.
Yeah. At this point, it's like just the way it happened was just fine.
Yeah. Like happy as can be. Can't believe that it happened. Like,
so for anybody that's just listening and not watching the video version, I mean, this deer is huge. He's a 9-point basically. He's got some junk that, you can hang a ring on it, but not a scoreable point.
Not scoreable.
Almost like a drop beam coming off. But I mean, this deer is in the upper 150s as a 9-point.
Right.
Like, put that into perspective.
Yeah.
Like, this deer is huge.
I just, like when I saw his first picture of the year, I'm just like, man.
Hey, you did invite me to come hunt.
I did. I said, hey, come on up. I need help hunting this thing. Like, the invite was there.
I know.
But then it's like, oh, hey, look at my 160s I got on camera.
No. I would feel bad.
Well, I have a strategy to it.
If I
invite you, and then maybe Mason will come, and maybe Mason will, let us into a secret spot.
No, but that's not what happens with Mason. Okay. Mason will come in, he'll kill your deer, and then he's gone, and then you'll never hear from him again. I'm kidding, but maybe. You got to keep him out.
Right.
Keep him out of the.
You got to go.
Yeah, Mason's got enough going on in a positive way for him.
Yeah, he's growing up. We're trying to play catch up.
Yeah. We'll see though. Mason just had a kid, so we'll see if Mason's success continues.
I know. I hope it does.
I know it will, but we got to keep on him about it to joke with him
for sure. Have to. We can't let it slide.
No,
can't let it slide.
You gotta. It's like, I don't know, man. It might be the end of the era,
right?
The legacy's just
gotta fizzle.
It's fizzling.
Yeah, right.
I know. Oh man, no, I'm so pumped for you. That deer is just crazy, and it's funny, like. After that happened, I talked to you, and then I even talked to you like a month later about it, and you're still just as pumped. And today, it's months later, and just as pumped.
Yeah, like I have the rack, as everyone can see, and the guy who's doing the taxidermy work say, "Hey, I'm not going to get to it for months. You keep this." And I showed up at his shop to pick up the rack, and I'm like, "Oh, thank God," because I was having separation anxiety. I drove around with it in my truck. Like I'd take it in and out like I would my lunchbox every day in my truck to show it to people. Like I was being that guy, and I'm like, I don't even care.
Yeah,
I have it sitting on my desk at the office, and I'll be dealing with some BS and stressed out about something, and I'll just spin in my chair and look at it. I'm like, everything's gonna be all
everything's
right.
gonna be A-okay.
A-okay. We're gonna figure this out. Like it's awesome, man.
No, like I said, man, so pumped for you and excited to spend some more time together at the scouting camp, get into that season, hanging out with everybody. And I did want to say again, for anybody that's listening, tell them again about what you do for a business.
Yeah, so my company is Generations Forestry. We're a consulting forestry firm. Our headquarters office is out of Kane. We have a branch office out of my house in DuBois, Pennsylvania, and we have another office in Hancock, New York. So we're kind of all over the place now. And we do private forest land management, from timber sales, forest inventories, wildlife habitat projects, herbicide application, road building, to OGM development, to everything in between when it comes to forestry, timber, land management, wildlife habitat. Now we've even got into the food plot game a little bit, just trying to, diversify what we can do. And, so and anything in the woods, we get it done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do people find out more about and get in contact with you?
Yeah. So probably the best way, it would be Instagram. I'm not very active. As someone went to my Instagram, you'd see I'm not very active. I'm not good at, I can talk anyone's ear off, but I'm not good at like putting myself out there social media wise of doing stuff. People try to get me to do it. If a bunch of people would say, "Hey, Kenny, we'd love to see like forestry content, management content," maybe it would give me that boost to do it, but I'm too big of a sissy to put myself out there. So if people want to see it, let me know. Maybe that'll bump me to do so. So my Instagram is Ken J. Kane.
At Ken
J. Kane. Yep. I got to even ask you to know what it is.
I know it, yeah.
Right. At Ken J. Kane's my Instagram, or we're on the web, generationsforestry.com. That's probably one of the best ways to get me. Instagram, or going to our website, sending an email. Yeah.
Awesome, man. It's just a pleasure to get to see this deer and get to hang out and see it. And it's pretty cool. But definitely anybody that's listening or watching, go check out Kenny's stuff, his website. You have any lands that you want to have managed or look at or whatever.
Yeah, questions about stuff. You want to know what's going on. Like, I try to do my best of responding to people, but between, phone calls, emails, this, that, I try to get back to everyone of like, "Hey, what's going on here? I saw this on the, this tract of public land that I hunt, and they're doing this. What's the why?" Hopefully, like, if you listen to the podcast or watch the video that we did a couple years back, like, it'll open your eyes of the why of things are happening on the landscape.
Yeah, that does remind me. Go back and check out. I had a video Kenny and I did together. It's on my YouTube channel. If you go under I think it's under the Mount Buck Scouting video series playlist, but you can go back and look, and where we went and looked at every different ages of timber harvest and looked at different, and Kenny gives the forestry side of it.
Yep.
I give my opinion on how I would hunt it, and you can check all that stuff out. You'll hear a lot of the stuff we talked about today in there, but definitely go take a look at that.
Yeah.
But thanks, buddy.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Man. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming and hanging out inside.
I
Nice
love
chilly
it.
day.
On a chilly day, it's a perfect thing to do.
All right, we'll see you, Kenny. Hey guys, thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, share it with your buddies. Leave us a rating, a review, and subscribe. If you want to check out more content like this, there's plenty in the links below. We truly appreciate having you guys along with us.